introducing our session, the Queen's University of Belfast Literary and Scientific Society! Great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening, back once again to the Senate room. Apologies for the slightly later than usual start. A few little things we had to deal with just there. But yes, it is very good to see you all. It's a cozier crowd this evening. It's more homely and intimate.
There's less people, you mean?
Yes.
It's very
So yes, we shall move swiftly along, I believe, to announcements. At some point I'm going to listen to like old recordings and figure out how other presidents did this, because I feel like I'm missing something, but this was not that week. So, the first item on our announcements, yes, so a belated announcement that really should have been said last week. Mr Hugh Dublin gives a wave. I don't believe anyone else is here. Inman isn't here, Shay isn't here, and Mr Bryson? Yes, isn't here. Yes, Mr Dublin and the other three that I mentioned, Miss Inman Friday Cortez, Mr Matthew Bryson and Mr Shay Glasgow, all journeyed down. When was it? Not this weekend, just past, but the one before? Yes?
Probably.
Down to the far and terrifying land of Dublin, to the UCD campus, indeed, to participate in the first round of the Irish Miss. Mr Dublin and Mr Glasgow were successful in proceeding to the second round, so I think they deserve a round of applause. Thanks to Mr Bryson and Miss Brody for attending. They were sadly unsuccessful in qualifying for the next round, but nevertheless we are very thankful to them for attending, and I apologise to the four of them for not giving this announcement last week.
Yes.
Also, a general announcement, which should really have been said every single week. It's just a brief one, a slight disclaimer. Which is this is the Ryan Neill disclaimer, because he's the one who's been reminding me. The views and opinions expressed by speakers obviously don't necessarily represent those of the House of the Council, but also, and critically, don't always necessarily even represent their own. It is not uncommon at all that people get drafted in at the very last minute to fill a slot that has been vacated just hours prior, and so they desperately have to scramble to fill 7 minutes in a coherent manner. So please, don't take anything any speaker says personally, because really, oftentimes, they're just trying to fill their 7 minutes. Third item is Finn's private member's business from last week. Any chance you could call up your phone and hand it to me later, whilst I read through the rest? Because it'll take me a minute to find it here. Third item, yes. So this is actually perfect for this week with the slightly lower turnout. We will, long last, be giving out membership numbers on your cards. Nice. So if you have a card, please come and speak to me at the end, and we'll get a number on it. There are other administrative reasons why it is crucial that you do this. So please do come to it again. No one should have a membership number yet on their card. Hello, fellas.
What if your card is in your door?
That's fine, you can do it some other week. Not everyone who has a card here this week, so it's fine. But if you do have a card, please speak to me at the end. Also, this is touching on something that we mentioned briefly last week. Charity work. We are doing charity work. Hooray! And as such, it was decided to cancel, but rather than council picking a charity or the house picking a random charity, what we're simply going to do is we're going to support one of the 4 ranked charities for this year.
Yeah.
And the way that we're going to decide which one is a poll will be put up in
Democracy.
What? Yes, democracy. Will be put up in the Literific forum probably tomorrow, and with the 4 options, you'll vote on those on the forum, and whichever one has the most votes by this time next week will be ratified by the House. So, yes, look out for that. 2 spaces remain for the Godkin debate. That's our main speakers debate. So if this is your first year of speaking at a debating society, not necessarily your first year at Queen's. I believe last year or the year before we had someone who was in their 3rd year at Queen's and had been a member for 3 years but who had never actually spoken, and they were eligible to speak at this. So yes, welcome to the debate. The motion is this House regrets the rise of positive discrimination. Thank you, fellas. And there will be a prize this year, not just like a candy bar or something. It will be quite a decent prize. So yes, please do.
Or soy milk.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Ryan. Flattery will be here. Not much left now. Halloween pub crawl. Our Halloween pub crawl was just this Monday past. Thank you very much to everyone who attended. It was jolly good fun. Am I right, people who were there?
You missed us.
I did not was there the entire time. Did you not see me?
You were not there the entire time.
I literally was. I will show you photos. I'm disappointed. Got the best chin. Resign. Anyway. What, Mr. Neill? What?
Are these just going to be pictures of the event with you just superimposed on your
The next item is so yes, similar to the charity thing. Next week is this house believes NI can have a post-sectarian election. Woo! And we had a little special thing planned for that. The NI Hospice charity got in contact with us a few months ago about hosting a big coffee break. So basically they have given us 1.25 kilograms of coffee to give to you lot, not for free, a donation will be requested, but we don't keep any of the money, it's all for charity. So next week, if you'd like a cup of coffee or multiple, get here early, you shall have coffee. A £2 donation will be asked, again, that's all for charity. And also, they have included like this sweepstake thing, so basically you'll be asked to guess how many coffee beans are in a cup. Again, £2 entry for that, but whoever gets closest gets half of the pot, and the other half then also goes to NI Hospice. So that's pretty decent. So finally, Finn, do you have it there? Finn! Memory span of a goldfish!
Says you.
Yes.
I said this to you last week and you forgot to read it out.
That's true, that is very true. Pot, kettle black and all that. That said, you did address this email to me as Dear Mr. Shannon. So, I think I'm winning this game.
I sent the email to the Literific president.
So yes, I actually just realised I don't need this yet. So, in that then, I would like to invite to read the minutes of last week's debate, the February meeting. This House would enforce equal margin and yes, our wonderful, delightful, charming, eloquent Secretary, Mr. Peter Dunn. It was terrorists last week.
Yes.
We both have the shivers, I know.
Indeed.
The society was thrown into chaos.
I was just going to make me look funny. The 5th meeting of the Literary and Scientific Society took place on the 26th of October 2017 and was attended by 73 members. The President swiftly moved into private members' business, which was started by Mr Erin Burnett, who asked the House if they would wish our social officer a very happy birthday. The President said this vote could only pass if we agreed to sing the social officer a happy birthday. And I can verify that the Literific bring a fine voice this evening. Mr John MacDonald, our treasurer, then asked if we would send our good wishes to Hillary Clinton, claiming that she shared many of the values that this fine society espoused. He was, let's just say, vastly mistaken, and thus the motion was quickly rejected. Mr Scott Moore then proposed to the House a motion related to a student at Queen's. I'm going to censor this a little bit. He proposed that this House would F the DDP.
That wasn't.
Don't worry, I'm getting to that. This is in relation to Miss Ellie Evans, who is currently being investigated for a hate crime by Jim Wells. A motion was then passed which read, this House believes in the right of the oppressor to say F you to the oppressed. And the motion was...
The other way, right?
Yeah, sorry, the oppressed to say the the motion was then passed. Mr. President Calvin Black swiftly moved into President's questions, which is started by Mr. President Emeritus Benjamin Murphy. He asked, despite the President's lack of opinion on pretty much everything and anything, was there anything that he listened to that he enjoyed in the last week? After thoughtful pondering, the House and the Secretary were desperate for the President to say something interesting. And alas, he did.
Ah! Objection, good sir. Shame was I.
The Divine Comedy was his answer, which met with moderate approval.
It was met with rising and tremendous approval.
Honorary Life Member and Secretary Emeritus, Mr Robert Whitehouse, then asked the President what his best moment of the year was. The President responded by saying meeting all the lovely people in front of him was of course his answer. I'm not sure if the people in front of him could say the same thing, but the answer was certainly approved of by the House. The President then introduced our guest chair for the evening, Ms Erin Burnett, a former political correspondent for the Irish News. After a few opening remarks, the President introduced the motion, this House would negotiate with terrorists. An opening vote was then taken on speakerability, which read 16 for proposition, 12 for opposition and 25 abstentions. Opening the debate up was someone who certainly isn't a stranger to the debating table. Honorary Life Member Mr Finbar Rogers started his argument for the proposition by saying that terrorist wasn't a useful term due to the cultural context. He went on to point out that negotiation doesn't necessarily mean that the two sides agree, thus giving room for sides who may be opposed in belief to produce productive results for negotiation. Starting the argument off the opposition was Mr Conor McMahon, who pleaded to speakers on both sides to not get bogged down in the morality of the debate, but rather to address the motion at hand. He argued by negotiating with terrorists, one would elevate them to a stronger position. He then concluded by saying that those with diametrically opposed ideals have no room for compromise. Continuing the argument for the proposition was Mr Scott Moore, who used Northern Ireland as a living and I think we can say breathing case study. He argued that the progress we have seen, that from a war-torn country to a place where we can happily live and enjoy student life, as a result of the Good Friday Agreement, thus showed that only way for successful reconciliation was through negotiation. Continuing that argument for the opposition was our very outreach officer, Ms Erin Neill, who argued that all solutions needed to be long-term. She made a comparison to good and bad parents, stating that you wouldn't reward a child for bad behaviour. She then went on to argue that negotiations were far too unpredictable and thus undermined peaceful political actors who fight for positive change. Third up for the proposition was Honorary Life Member Mr Sarah Gallen, who stated there are two options when dealing with enemies, either eliminating them or negotiating. No prizes to which side Karen was propagating. He also made the point that you can't make the separation between state actors and non-state actors, arguing that the Jews in Germany would be non-state actors. He concluded by simply saying that history was on the proposition side. Third proposition was Mr Hugh Duggan, who, with a relief to the House, stated that his speech should be smarter than his dressings. The thrust of Mr Duggan's argument was that it was set a very dangerous precedent to bring terrorists to the negotiating table. It would thus normalise the atrocities taken out by extreme terrorist organisation action. He pleaded to the House to reject the ideas of terrorism and to minimise the effect on the population. Including for the proposition was Mr Derek Crosby, who claimed that the opposition cited their use of case studies. They didn't use case studies because they simply hadn't. He stated that one could not just erect walls, but rather break them down with negotiating. He said other means of conflict resolution just led to the rise of similar groups, and concluded by simply saying the proposition's argument is that they offer peace. Closing for the opposition and thus the debate was Mr Ali Raja. He started his speech by reading shocking statements, but followed by a terrorist organisation. He then put it to the House of whether anyone would really want to negotiate with people who believed in the values that supported these statements. He then went on to say that negotiating should not be a one-way street, as he argued it often is in historical situations. To finish, he quickly wrote, as it's impossible to win the marriage, it's impossible to win in negotiation. Questions were then heard from Mr Liam Mackle, Mr Ryan Neill, Mr Christopher Dawson, Mr Morgan Hickman and Mr Conor Neill. They casting a vote on the motion that this House should negotiate with terrorists, then read 21 votes for the proposition, 4 for the opposition and 11 abstentions. Thus, the motion was carried. May I thank the Mr.
Clap. Good job. Here, may I feel a bit like there for a moment? videoing Mr. Dunn there. We need sample did it for later. That's what that was. So yes, I could have been that myself. I feel rather frazzled this evening, can you tell? There's your phone, Finn.
You don't need this.
No, I found it online. So, now, on to private members' business. The first item on private members' business for this evening is a piece that is was sent in last week by Mr. Rogers, so let's get right to it.
2 weeks ago.
He writes, yes, 2 weeks ago, apologies, Mr. Rogers, for the delay. Dear Mr. Shannon, that would be our eternal leader, I am writing to you today in order to gauge both opinion and level of awareness of a matter pressing to student life and living at Queen's University Belfast, a matter which has plagued the good name of the university since the time when E.L. Gotkin was but a humble fresher getting blown around the back of Kelly Sellers, whatever that might mean, when Im McCann was but a mere glint in James Connor's moustache. I refer, of course, to the matter of students of Queen's wearing their gowns in an improper manner whilst on campus. Improper here, meaning not at all. This is a matter which has roused the ire of the Literific Hydra not just once but twice since the founding of this esteemed society. Once in the days of the older religion, pre-1968, did the council write to the university to address this monstrosity of sartorial slacking. More recently, the issue was raised again by Dr. Stephen Goss, HLM, an esteemed harpsichord tutor to the 164th session. Regardless of the numerous calls for action from the Literific, the university has remained as flaccid as Jim Wells on an Easter Sunday, or just as Queen's is usually, his words, not mine. It seems necessary that the matter should be raised again in order that the next step may be decided. Dare I say, we might even think it necessary to discuss a possible nuclear option. I look forward to your reply. Yours with one bat, HENM, Finbar Rogers, KGB, MPBA, Joint Honours, MA and Bar, PS, Mind Out for Plant Life. As peculiar as Mr. Rogers, that I do appreciate. So yes, I believe the question that Mr. Rogers was asking, albeit in a fairly roundabout way, is what does this house think of the fact that these wonderful gowns are not required attire to those participating in campus life? Who has any thoughts on the matter? I saw Mr. Dublin's hand go up first, so Mr. Dublin, please stand.
I don't really care.
I mean, I'll let you win next time, but because that was a short one, nonetheless. Miss Butlerless?
As someone who is under 5 feet, those things look terrible on me. I've had to wear it in high school, like I had to wear something similar to that when I graduated from high school. No, it's not the same. Like, and I'm really glad that we don't have to wear those anymore because I would look terrible, and I'm sure other people feel the same.
Oh wow, let's go with Miss Fleming.
It's not so much about the guys, but I mean, we wrote to them a couple of years ago and there was no response, and that's just rude.
Indeed. Mr. Burke?
I think that if the society did require for people to wear gowns here, it would be highly exclusionary and would put off new members from participating. So I don't think it would be that good an idea.
Here, here.
Mr. Neill?
The only question here is Finn's sanity.
I mean, I think we're way beyond the questioning point there, Neill. Mr. Dunn?
As lovely as these gowns are, as much as we like to keep up with tradition and everything, it also gets flipping hot. And these gowns, and I wouldn't like to put that across everybody in society. So that's my piece on that.
Two else, someone?
Do we really want people in our society who are unwilling or unable to wear gowns?
Oh no. I would love to possibly say a word beginning with H and rhyming with jeer, but I couldn't possibly. Mr. Doherty?
I think that should only come into force if we can choose what colour they are.
Yes.
I believe there are set colours for different academic levels, hence why in the yes, there are gowns. Come in. Mr. Gallagher,
Actually, thank you for covering that last point. If the society doesn't like the idea of the compulsory wearing of gowns, you have one body to thank for that, and that is in fact Queen's Students' Union. who had helped abolish them in the first place. It's the Literific noise in the day. Inclusion for all, etc. Blah blah blah. And I did have a point after that, and I forgot that subject again.
You know, Mr. Gallagher, as I'm sure you already do know, that the Literific was the original union, and as far as I recall, we were never legitimately removed of that status. So as far as I'm concerned, any movement by the union to remove guys is not legitimate. Mr. Gallen.
Or a few decades.
On your feet, Mr. Gallen.
Yeah.
So I've long advocated that Literific be a casual society. In fact, the degree to which people have been dressing smartly for debates this year has been dissatisfactory. So I, for one, welcome the abolition of gowns for ordinary members. You and Peter can continue to because you just look so damn cute.
The latter or the former part?
No, the former.
Actually, go ahead then.
Former part. May I remind you that one of the strong reasons this society was banned from campus for so many decades, a few decades ago, was because one particular member took a casual aspect and all too serious.
Very true, Mr. Gallagher. Any final points of the motion? No? Okay. Ms. Ballard, one final closing point then?
I really agree with you. I'm a big, casual clothes person at heart. I love sweatshirts, hoodies, everything, and I don't think it makes you, less professional. Because, if you have, a really nice clean sweater, hoodie, I still feel really professional, so, yeah.
Well, so that is the godkin is spinning in his grave, Miss but yes, Mr. Rogers, do you feel this needs to be put to a vote of some sort, or are you happy with that discussion?
Either or.
In that case, in the interest of time, I will thank the House for that fascinating discussion, and I will retreat to the council cave, and I will formulate a plan for how we can see and bring about a glorious resurgence in the government. But until that time, I shall refrain from putting a motion to the floor. Are there any other items of private members' business, Mr. Hickman?
I would just like to ask if the House would support Belfast City Council's recent, and by recent I mean last night at around 8:30, support of the proposal that the vote be given to 16 and 17-year-olds in this region.
Very good, thank you, sir. Alright, good point. Anybody have any comments on that? Mr. Mackle?
I'm not probably not going to be agreed with you, but I think with how much 16 and 17-year-olds pay attention to social media, and with the fact with the recent election in the US, how much social media has impacted on the election, I think allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote might mean our elections might be up to more manipulation that those who are able to manipulate social media.
An interesting question, Michael. Thank you very much. Mr. Murphy.
16-year-olds are old enough to work, pay taxes, join the army, get married. They can have sex with their MP, but they can't vote for them. How does that make any sense?
Well said. Mr. Sullivan.
Just on the argument that you can join the army but can't vote, you can't be sent into actual battles or any sort of combat role until you're 10.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Ms. Gallen.
On the point that you can join the army at 16, you can't buy scissors in the UK at 16. So maybe that's why they don't allow us to vote.
I will go for Mr. Doherty.
As someone who was too young to vote in both Brexit referendum and in the 2017 general election, I agree with this because it allows people that are really young like me to actually have a say when they're only about 2 months. I was only a month younger than when the election took place to be allowed to vote in it. So I think it's unfair on those sorts of people to deny them the right to vote when they are so close to that age.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Well said. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you. It's quite clear recent events have made incontrovertible that far too many people are allowed to vote already. For example, all
all of those people in East Londonderry who vote for Gregory Campbell. Now I can understand voting for the DUP. I can understand why people are in a certain mindset that pushes them to do that. I don't agree with it, but I can understand it. Yeah, but I'm just more intelligent than you are.
Objection.
No. But voting for Gregory Campbell specifically, there is no excuse for that. It's really bad crap.
I'd like to point out that you brought that up on your self-timer by interrupting him. I'll take one final point from Mr. Neill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think there is a lot of romanticism, especially in a society that is already political, but again, the majority of students probably do not know as much as certain people in this room. And I think there is, as an outstanding point, there's an absolute trend between people getting older and not wanting under 18s to vote, and so it's something to think about as you get older, because that is the trend.
Thank you, Mr. Neill. I'm afraid for the interest of time, can I just Mr. Gallagher, do you remember Nathan Anderson?
Yes.
Do you know what's...
About the situation.
Do you want to say anything before the motion?
If you want me to.
Yes, please do.
I'm not an expert on the situation, but Nathan Anderson, who's a former vice president of the Students' Union, currently a serving councillor in I can't remember which district.
Lisburn, Castle.
Thank you.
And also for a long time member of the society.
Yes, spoken many times. We've clashed words a few times. But a very good man. I wouldn't have a bad word said about him. And his he got married recently to an American woman. Unfortunately, their visa, their visa, so that they could be in the same location, i.e., for her to come over here, was denied. The reasons why, I think, was something to do with their joint salary not being quite enough, which doesn't seem to really hold up when you hold it against the rules for immigration to this country. The upshot being, of course, his wife recently went through a miscarriage and they were unable to be with each other, frankly. So I think what the President is alleging, please forgive me if I'm misjudging here, is that we send our support to Councillor Nathan Anderson in a particularly trying time.
Yes, that is exactly what I was getting at. He's a good man. His personal politics probably would not align with some people in the room, but nevertheless, he is a good man and has been a good member and a friend of the society. So I would urge that someone would second this motion. Second. So just to clarify, the motion is that this House would send its support to Nathan Anderson and Councillor Nathan Anderson and his family at this time. All those in favour, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Yes. All those against say nay. Abstaining say nay. Passed unanimously. Thank you very much. We shall go to a remarkably fast and lightning round of President's questions. Does anybody have any questions for me? I shall go with Mr. Solomon.
Did you get your haircut?
I did in fact. Yes, I did just today. In fact, skinny guys, 6-7-year-olds, good chaps. They have a loyalty card. You get 10 haircuts, you get one free. It's amazing. Any other questions? Ms. Burnett.
So there has been a meme made about you in the Literific memes for God Convenes about how you're so neutral and everything. And this is it's a little serious, but this is my favorite sweatshirt, which means that if you're neutral, you stand on the side of the oppressor, and I want to know how you would address that.
I mean, I'm not sure what else to say, Ms. Burnett. Apart from the fact that, there really is nothing that I enjoy more than oppressing everyone upon this earth. I am completely in agreement with that shirt. Frankly, if everybody could be beneath my thumb and my boot heel, I would be a happy man indeed. So yes, I have no objection to that. It's quite wonderful. Maybe
how it does to everybody.
Bar can't grab those who already have a flag card. Something terrible. Mr. Allen.
So, since you've already made an announcement about how much fun we all had, of the pubs that we all went to on Monday night, which was your favourite pub?
My favourite would probably have to be Apartment, although the Duke of York was quite nice. It has a nice feel to it. Although where did we go to first? Damn, I can't even remember that one. Probably Apartment was nice because it reminded me of the where we went after the Conversazione back in the 167 session. Yes, Apartment was quite nice. Anyone else? Any other questions? Mr. Doherty.
Since I've already referenced it, what did you have for lunch?
Oh, help me out. I had, it was quite a late lunch, about 4, 2 cheese flaps, and a packet of salt and vinegar McCoy's.
Good choice.
McCoy's are the best crisps. They're a bit crunchy. And salt and vinegar is the superior flavour. Yes, good man. Any final questions? Going once, going twice. So, this evening, can I have that here? There you go. I must apologise for once again I have not prepared for this particular set. Oh, actually, I have prepared for this particular session too early. First of all, a vote on prior opinion. So, the motion this evening, as all of you are probably quite well aware, is this House Would Blaspheme. So, this, you don't need to remember to card for this bit, this means this isn't the binding vote. But yes, so, quick show of hands. Could all those who currently would like to vote in favour of the motion that this House would blaspheme, please raise your hand and say aye! Aye. Keep them up, keep them up. And could all those who would like to vote against the motion, please raise your hand and say nay! Nay. Keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. That's like a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 12 was rejected? 13. There's 14. All those who'd like to abstain, please raise your hand and say meh. Meh. Give up, give up. Well, I believe that the proposition had that vote, so yes. Finally, once again, we have a very special guest chair this evening. What I was going to say earlier was that I want to apologise to our guest chair. I haven't done my due diligence, my background research, as I really should. So, all I really have in the way of an introduction is that our guest speaker, or guest chair rather this evening, is a lecturer here at Queen's. He is a reverend, he is a doctor, and his name is Paul Bailie. So could you please welcome him?
Mr. President, it gives me great pleasure to address you very briefly this evening. I've already been thoroughly warned by Mr. Secretary that guest chairs by golf and ramble on at excessive length.
That's not quite what I said, but I was
very, very gently there, but it's a great pleasure to be here. Some 25 years ago, I'm afraid it is as long ago as that, I was the president of the Queen's University Belfast Debating Society, or whatever we called ourselves then. Hard to believe. Literific, I've heard of that. But of course, we didn't realise it would be banned under dubious circumstances. Doubtless well deserved.
Yes.
But yes, indeed, in my days, I blew my own trumpet. I was the Queen's orator. I don't know if that still exists or not, but we had a very cruel president back in my day. And for example, he selected the secretary purely because the secretary had an impenetrable accent and a speech impediment. And it really was very cruel. So for many, many years, this guy kept on being re-elected. And for many years, we'd never had any clue what the minister said. So you were a model of clarity. But yes, I remember the night I got the Queen's orator, the president cruelly shoved into my hands then a sheaf of apologies from the various members of the aristocracy that he had invited to the debating society that evening. And of course the aristocracy appear to write very much like drunken baboons, and the Queen's orator couldn't actually read any of these things and looked very foolish in front of those aristocracy that they had turned up. I will be brief because, as we've already observed, time has marched on. But it is lovely to see that the theatricality and the humour of this society has not been diminished by the passing of the years. And as you can see, I side on the side of those who wish to be informal. The only reason I'm not wearing a gown this evening is, and this is true, that the moth's got at mine and it's not wearable anymore. I'm afraid I am not old. Blasphemy. Let me not ramble on about this unduly. Blasphemy comes from Greek, an academic theologian, I suppose. Part of my life, another part of my life, I work overseas in a country very often where blasphemy is in fact punishable with very, very severe penalties indeed. But blasphemy comes from Greek, it means injurious speech, but obviously very much in the sense of profanity or sacrilege. In Europe, in the Christian tradition, the idea of blasphemy finds its origins in the Old Testament, particularly the commandments, but also in Leviticus chapter 24. Within Islamic tradition, there are prohibitions against profaning the name of Allah and also Muhammad in the Quran and also in the Hadith. In the world today, particularly with the decline of religion in Europe, the rise of secularism, the post-Enlightenment period, many blasphemy laws have essentially become inoperative and dead. And many world bodies, such as the United Nations and the European Union, the Council of Europe and so forth, have spoken against the very idea of having blasphemy laws. But, as we already mentioned this evening, there are many parts of the world, even tonight, where if you were to be perceived as blaspheming, you could pay for that with your life. So it is very much a hot topic in many parts of the world. But even here in Europe, it seems to be maybe a dead issue. There are issues relating to freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And of course the whole debate now about protected groups and what constitutes hate speech. So I'm very much looking forward to this particular debate, and I'd like to assure those that although I may be an academic theologian, there will be rigorous impartiality from the chair. Thank you very much.
Very much, good sir. Just before I welcome our first speaker, I'd like to remind the House that in cases of motions regarding religious topics or political topics, the standing orders regarding religious and political polemic being forbidden are implicitly waived. So it would be detrimental to the debate if we were to put such restrictions on our speakers this evening. Hopefully they will not go too overboard, but nevertheless, they are technically free to do so. So, without any further ado, on behalf of our guest chair this evening, I would like to welcome to open the motion, Mr Ryan Neill.
Mr. President, honourable members of the House. Blasphemy, not only as a concept, but also as a moral metric, is useless at best. The act of insulting, showing contempt or lacking reverence towards a god or any religious person or thing is neither inherently moral nor immoral. It is in fact an amoral act, defined primarily by its context and completely open to interpretation. So, in order for the argument to be made that this House would indeed blaspheme, it's imperative that we establish the context. In other words, why would this House blaspheme? Now, there's no question that we're at liberty to blaspheme as much as we like, given that we have the freedom of speech enshrined in our law. This is an obvious fact. Though it should be said that if you insist on showing a Christian a picture of God wearing, I don't know, the sun as a ball gag, chances are he may not invite you around for tea later that evening, unless he means that. So it's safe to say that this House wouldn't blaspheme needlessly. At the very least, in the interests of common decency and getting along with one another. No, this House would blaspheme in circumstances of necessity. Dissent and open confrontation of all ideas, inclusive of religion, are not only essential elements of our freedom of speech, but also essential tools for which to hold institutions and their doctrines to account against both reality and their own fundamental theologies. Yes.
On that point,
I'll go for it.
do you think that you can maybe like criticize the way like a religious institution is doing something without blasphemizing it? Like, do we always like need blasphemy?
Okay, well, it depends. You see, here's the thing. Blasphemy is pure interpretation. It is the interpretation of what you said in comparison to the doctrine of the institution that is viewing or perceiving what you said. So you may not go out of your way to blaspheme, but what you said may be considered blasphemy nonetheless. So, yes. Mockery and parody to expose an ideal's fallacy as farce. Individuals opposing current doctrinal interpretation, rejection of authority of religious figures or even deities, are all examples of blasphemy where necessity is likely. And those instances where the proposition not only believes that this House would, but should blaspheme, should the need arise. As with all things, the moral justification of the act is found in its substance and context. So that's fine as a principle. I'm sure we can all support that reasoning as an abstraction unapplied. That said, it is the application of this principle where the strength of the proposition's argument is truly revealed, as this is where we see blasphemy as a moral foundation come away into the purely subjective, vapid nothing that it is. For who decides what is blasphemous and what is not? What one individual or institution can indisputably claim an all-knowing interpretation or authority over the transcendent, and do so with any semblance of credibility. To quell a factual and truthful argument, or even a mere opinion, on the basis of perceived blasphemy or irreverence, is a cheap and abusable means for the powerful to subvert the opposition in matters of faith. The proposition can provide both religious examples as well as secular reasons for why blasphemy is an awful moral metric which carries no weight. In terms of the religious, given that this week, in fact, was the anniversary, Martin Luther's 95 Theses, which include criticisms of the Vatican's doctrine and actions, including the act of selling indulgences, resulted in Luther being branded a heretical blasphemer by the Church. The Vatican's dogma and rejection of opposition resulted in what could likely be called Protestantism and the Peasants' Revolt. Their intransigence invited disaster and what can only be described as a second schism in Christendom. In terms of secular, we need to look no further than the horrendous treatment of Galileo regarding his theory of heliocentrism, for which he was interned indefinitely under house arrest, which, sadly, he died at this moment, he was never released again. The idea of the planets orbiting the Sun is a well-established scientific fact. I hope you all agree. However, blasphemy was used to silence truth and shut down debate, in this case by the Roman Inquisition. So it's quite clear why this House would blaspheme, for we would have no problems making an argument we believe to be true, irrespective of the protests of our detractors and whatever buzzwords they will use to negatively market our ideas, such as blasphemy. It's important to consider that nobody labels themselves as a blasphemer. That is a label thrown around from the ideological opposition, with the sole purpose of shutting down the argument. Now, there will always be those who wish to insult faiths of others for the sake of insult. However, our proposition to yourselves tonight makes the distinction from this, that the distinction being the content of the argument. I described some examples of how blasphemy as a concept applied leads to a very spurious outcome inconsistent with either truth or our inherent human decency. And the rest of the proposition tonight will continue to provide further examples should you remain unconvinced. In circumstances of the religious zeitgeist, pushing forward harmful, discriminatory, corrupt, or just plain incorrect statements of doctrine, I would like to believe this House would see it as their solemn duty to resist and oppose such policy, not only as an academic imperative, but as a moral one. To maintain the integrity of their truth in the face of those crying blasphemy and heresy, to have the courage to stand for what is right in the face of religious authority, for the greater good of the people, the congregation, and for society as a whole. Given that this House holds the art of debate in such high esteem, I have every belief that you will stand with me should the need arise and make our voices heard. So I say this with confidence. This House would blaspheme. Thank you very much.
Mr Neill, thank you, sir. We're going to welcome now Erin Burnett. who's giving her maiden speech.
Mr President, honoured chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. This evening, this House will be arguing against the motion that we would not blaspheme. I will be examining it, looking at culture and semantics. My colleague Sarah will then follow up, looking at it from a human rights point of view. My colleague Daniel will then examine it from a theological aspect. In particular, he will be looking at cosmological arguments, and he will be dealing with the issue of morality, as was brought up by the proposition. Morgan will then summarise our arguments. I must start by clarifying that we, as the proposition, are not seeking to criminalise blasphemy. As the proposition mentioned, we have the free will to behave however we see fit. But this House would argue that blasphemy is simply not a wise decision to make. The proposition had quite a liberal definition of blasphemy, and I wish to slightly challenge them. I believe blasphemy is more than simple disagreement with the Church. For instance, I would disagree that what Martin Luther did was blasphemy per se. I would say that blasphemy would have... I accept.
Well, the Catholic Church at the time would disagree with you because they considered it blasphemy. So certainly this ambiguity and abstraction is an example of how it's a useless term.
Personally, I would think blasphemy must have some sort of malicious or derogatory intent towards God, the object of the religion, rather than the institutions of the religion itself. So Luther was criticising the institution, but not the God, which is why I would not count that as blasphemy. But if we were to do what the proposition suggests and exercise our freedom to blaspheme when we feel it is necessary, it would have a detrimental effect on social harmony in our increasingly multicultural and multi-faith society. In this regard, we have the United Nations on our side, as in 2006 they released a declaration which stated, "Defamation of religions is amongst the causes of social disharmony and often leads to a violation of human rights." To look at this motion purely from an angle of individual freedom is fundamentally self-centred and ignores the views and religions of some of the most oppressed members of our society.
On that point,
I accept.
Western liberalism was completely evolved towards individualism. Like that's what we live in, that's what's thrived the last 300 years. Also, you talk about tolerance. What is your tolerance for people who wish to act in such a way?
In society, as I will describe in my speech, tolerance can only go so far. So, for instance, even though we would have the freedom to racially, verbally abuse someone based on their race, I would not say that's an appropriate thing to do. So likewise, I'm going to argue that abusing someone based on religion, likewise, is not an appropriate thing to do. Because according to the Office of National Statistics, some 4.5 million foreign-born citizens of the UK are religious believers, most of whom being either Muslim, African Pentecostal, or Polish Catholic. These groups already suffer from institutional racism, and adding blasphemy and disrespect for their religions will only deepen already existing divides in our society.
On that point.
I reject. For instance, depicting images of the Prophet Muhammad is considered blasphemy in Islam, yet in 2015 the UKIP candidate Anne-Marie Waters decided to arrange an exhibit of images of Muhammad. There was nothing illegal about her actions. She was simply expressing her artistic freedom. And to quote the words of the proposition, she felt this was a necessary act of blasphemy because she felt her culture was being threatened. But just because you can do something does not mean it is wise, especially when we consider that religious-based hate crime is up 500% in the past year. My colleague Sarah will be further examining, I reject, the relationship between rights and responsibilities. Furthermore, I wish to consider the motion from a purely semantic point of view. The English language is a complex and beautiful language with so many ways of expressing strong emotion without needing to resort to cheap religious defamation. As I focused on Islam earlier, I will now specifically focus on blasphemy against the Christian religion, which remains held by a third of the world. The name of Jesus Christ, whom Christians worship, is now used subconsciously as a swear word. However, the atheist commentator Gordo Laidlaw pointed out how using Christ as a swear word makes no sense. I object. If you are not a believer, Christ was just a carpenter who lived 2,000 years ago, said some nice things about love and died. So, can't we think of better ways of expressing our emotions than relying on such lazy blasphemy? My colleague Daniel will examine this Christocentric approach further in his speech. The beauty of language is that it evolves over time as society progresses and becomes more inclusive. As I draw my speech to a close, may I ask you to examine your motives when you blaspheme? Is it a subconscious habit? Is it an attempt to start a conversation? Or are you simply doing it to irritate people? The difference between blasphemy and genuine criticism of religion lies in intent. I am more than happy to have a debate of the merits and demerits of religion, but not if it simply dissolves into blasphemous slander. I will finish with a quote from the late Paul Kurtz, a humanist and very much an atheist. He said, "It is one thing to examine and criticise the claims of a religion in a responsible way, but it is quite another to violate the key humanist principle of tolerance." Thank you.
Thank you for that very much. And I invite the House then to, just in a traditional way, thank our maiden speaker. Mr Scott Moore for the proposition.
Mr. President, honoured guests, thank you for having me. I believe in the absolute equality of all religious beliefs before the law. I believe absolutely in freedom of religion and freedom from religion. And I believe absolutely in separation of church and state. I am a secularist. These are my convictions. What happens in a place of worship amidst freely submitting members is their own business, as long as they don't violate anyone's rights. But beyond those walls, blasphemy is too often used as license to declare someone's speech as illegitimate, to try and curtail their free speech, or punish them for exercising it when they have harmed nobody. Sometimes it worms its way into our laws, and in many countries, innocent people are executed for the crime of holding different beliefs. Make no mistake, wherever it happens, be it in an execution or with public figures illegitimately attempting to no-platform people for legitimate speech, the blasphemy card is about one thing: control. Here, it is about crumbling, out-of-touch hierarchies, be they religious or political, trying desperately to grasp a hold of any power they can at a time when their relevance is fading. The terms holier than thou spring to mind very strongly when we think, for example, of a Newton-Abbey DUP councillor calling for a play to be cancelled because it satirises the Bible. In a secular society, everyone is entitled to their own beliefs, but no one is entitled to force them on anyone else. If you find a play blasphemous, don't watch it. But if other people want to see it, don't try and shut it down. If you were on a diet, you wouldn't go up to people and stop them eating donuts, because that's nothing to do with you. The best analogy I've heard is, religion is like a penis. It's okay to have one. It's okay to be proud of it. But once you start swinging it in my face and shoving it down my throat, then we have a problem. On that point.
It's what we deal with in the modern context today is that for the first time religious people are now in a minority in the UK. What you're saying, and in the context of blasphemy then, This could be something being shoved in people's face, because this is now the minority who are having their views mocked at by wider society. I do not feel that that's what blasphemy represents, and is therefore suppressing the minds of the religious people that are now a minority in that society.
Well, I think there's an important distinction between criticising and satirising ideas and hate speech or harassment directed at people on the basis of their religious views, and that's something I'll be coming on to. It's common sense, and they know it, but hunger for power and being morally imposing, dare I say superior over others, and virtue signaling all appeals to these people's interests in a way that transcends common sense and wins out. Many proponents of the idea of blasphemy have a big advantage on their side. They are able to obfuscate and blur the line between their illegitimate efforts to shame others into silence with the actual legitimate efforts to protect people from discrimination and harassment for their religious beliefs. But for me, the two are incomparable for one simple reason. People have rights, ideas do not. Me criticising your religion does not make this society an unsafe place for people of your religion in a way it would if I harassed you as an individual in your religious beliefs. It particularly doesn't make you unsafe if your religion, which I am criticising, happens to be the majority religion or the biggest religion within that society. And I cannot stress that enough. Christians in Northern Ireland are not oppressed. Christians in Britain and Ireland are not oppressed. Christians in America are not oppressed. They are the majority or a plurality. Not only is it laughable to claim you're oppressed, it is insulting and offensive to Christians in the Middle East and Africa who get executed for their religious beliefs. Compared to people in Northern Ireland claiming that equal marriage for LGBT people violates the rights of the Christian majority. Hogwash. Fundamentally, blasphemy and its enforcement are arbitrary, nonsensical, and illegitimate. Why should Christianity be enforced in all of society as opposed to any other religious belief? Being the majority religion isn't a good enough reason. The whole idea of a liberal democratic society is that people have inviolable rights and dignity the majorities can't wash away.
On that point,
yes?
Just because you have the right to say basically whatever you want, it's free speech, surely that still doesn't mean that you should say things that will offend people if there's no reason to say those things.
Well, it depends on what basis they're offended on. If they're offended by you making legitimate criticism or satirising or ridiculing these ideas, then I don't believe they have a legitimate basis upon which to be offended. But if it's hate speech or harassment, that's something different, as I've touched upon. A massive gripe I have with people who play the blasphemy card is those who play with language themselves. Language itself. If I'm around you and I say, oh God, or oh Jesus, and you tell me, don't swear, or a variation of that, then you can actually wise up. Your religious laws do not apply to me, and if you think they do, too can play at that game. Maybe one day I will convert from being non-religious to believing in wordism, whose only rules are that you cannot say any of the 50 most common words of whatever language you speak. So if you use words like the, be, to, and of, in my presence, I might say, don't swear. And if that sounds unreasonable to you, that will be because it is unreasonable.
On that point, sir?
Yes?
Well, the first speaker for the opposition did make it clear on their definition of blasphemy that they have no problem with people making legitimate criticisms against our religion. But actually just trying to be offensive is what they had a particular problem with.
Well, I'm sure they have a certain idea of what they think blasphemy is or what it should be, but it simply doesn't line up with how a lot of other people think it is or should be, and that's something I'm going to be coming up with now. Because there are an infinite number of religions you could come up with, and an infinite number of possible blasphemous words or ideas, then everything is blasphemous. The motion is this House would blaspheme. To not blaspheme would mean to become completely silent, to say and write nothing. How could it possibly be reasonable to request that of a debating society, of opinionated students? But we all know this is a problem beyond petty nuisance. It has particularly come to the fore with the controversy over the Danish newspaper, which printed images satirising the Prophet Muhammad. Just as I defend the right of people to blaspheme against Christianity, I defend the right of people to blaspheme against Islam. If I want to draw a picture of Muhammad, I will do so, even though I'm not that good of an artist. But the fact that you can draw a stick figure and then draw an arrow pointing at it, saying Muhammad, and that would be considered offensive, is ridiculous and shows just how arbitrary this idea of blasphemy is and how it is all about control. I will conclude with this. advocates of the idea of blasphemy don't want people to rush the vote. They want people to keep the peace, not to offend people. When it comes to talking about this, we talk too much about offending people and not enough about whether it is reasonable for them to be offended. The biggest imperative, it appears, is that we must be tolerant. But who's really intolerant here? Those demanding to freely criticise ideas or those seeking to control people? Once again, in order to be tolerant, we must be intolerant of intolerance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have another maiden speaker now. This is Sarah Gallen.
Mr. President, Honoured Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Let me be very clear, ladies and gentlemen. Despite what Mr. Murch has informed you, we are not trying to control all of you by saying that you should not blaspheme. We are not trying to throw you in jail if you blaspheme. My learned colleague, Ms Burnett, made that very clear. In fact, it is a fundamental part of living in a democracy that you are allowed the fundamental right of freedom of expression. And I must agree with the proposition when they say this is a fundamental right. But what the proposition have failed to acknowledge is that this fundamental right comes with a caveat, a part B. In Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights, it does indeed state that everyone has the right to freedom of expression. However, it also states, and I quote, that the having and using of this freedom carries with it duties and responsibilities. As I am commonly told when I try to start a debate at my kitchen table, there's a time and a place, Sarah, and the dinner table isn't it. Ladies and gentlemen, the same principle applies to blasphemy. Due to freedom of expression, if you... Yes?
Yes. I agree. That's why I brought forward the motion in that way. It's not needless blasphemy, it's blasphemy through necessity. So it is blasphemy in the sense that it may not even be intended, but it is through the interpretation of the listener. But what matters is the content of what you say and whether or not it's true.
Well, in today's society, blasphemy is commonly seen as taking the Lord's name in vain and claiming that God does not exist no matter what your religion is. So I feel that saying that anyone can interpret what you're saying as blasphemy is a bit extreme. The same principle of there being a time and a place applies to blasphemy. If you wish to go to your own home and blaspheme, there's nothing I or anyone else can do to stop you. If you're with your close friends and choose to blaspheme, once again, there's nothing I or anyone else can do to stop you. However, blaspheming in public, blaspheming where you know there are going to be religious people, is ridiculous. It goes against common sense. You are trying to cause offence. Just as I imagine most of you would think it wise not to swear in front of a room of 5-year-olds, you shouldn't blaspheme in public. No, thank you. Furthermore, our freedom of expression is routinely restricted in our day-to-day life. We think nothing of this. Most of the time, we agree it's sensible. It is banned on television before 9 o'clock to show extreme violence or sex scenes or to swear. We agree with that because we feel that our young children should not be exposed to these things. But it does restrict our freedom of expression. We live in a society where a baker throwing his baked Alaska into a bin meant that Ofcom received 800 complaints. We live in a society where people are offended easily, and that is why things need to be restricted, because, as Ms Burnett said, blasphemy disharmonises society, and we need society to be harmonised. Even the Literific society restricts our freedom of expression. If I were to swear here tonight I would be fined no matter how reasonable or unreasonable you may think this. The Literific Society usually restricts freedom of expression even more because in its constitution it says that party politics and religious polemics are expressly forbidden during meetings of the Society. That is restricting our free speech. However, despite disagreeing with blasphemy in public, no thank you, I do not feel that I lack a sense of humour. I enjoy comedy, and I acknowledge that comedy involves quite often offending people.
On that one?
Yes.
Then, so, if you enjoy comedy and you're trying to say that you don't care about that, why do you care about people blaspheming when they are trying to do something wrong with you?
Because blasphemy causes much more offence than many other things, and 84% of the entire population of the world believe in one religion or another. And as I was about to say, it depends what comedy is attacking. Comedy, if it is going to focus on religion, should focus on the institutions of the faith and the people involved in the institutions. Let's look at Father Ted as a case study. Father Ted is a hilarious show, and I am quite willing to have another debate with anyone who disagrees with me. It's become part of our culture, its sayings have become part of our language. Yet quite often the funniest moments in it do not involve blasphemy. Kicking Bishop Brennan up and because I'm not sure to what extent the Literific Society restricts my free speech, I'm going to go with rear end is not blasphemy. Having Father Ted accused of stealing church funds and defending himself with the money was only resting in my bank account is not blasphemy. Father Dougal's idiocy, Father Jack's drunkenness, and Mrs Doyle's you will attitude to tea is not blasphemy, yet it is what makes the show the beloved show it is today, a treasure, one could say. And Father Ted is not the only show that successfully ridicules the institutions without resorting to blasphemy. The Vicar of Dibley does this also. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've made very clear is that we all have the freedom of expression. However, this freedom of expression is not without its limitations. To have the right to say whatever you feel comes with responsibility to not to offend others. When it comes to God, to religion, to faith, in the words of Aretha Franklin, all I'm asking for is a little respect. Blasphemy shows the faith of religious believers no respect at all.
Carol, thank you for that, and I invite the House then to thank the maiden speaker. Mr Conor Lockhart.
Ladies, gentlemen, most esteemed opposition and Mr. President, a reading from the Gospel of St. Mark. 14. You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. Why should we blaspheme? What happens when we restrict it? What indeed is blasphemy, as we've heard so often tonight? First, I would like to talk about truth. Now, truth is resilient. It does not require protection from criticism. It is enduring. Religion itself needs it for the refining of doctrine. Science needs it for progress. Coerced love is not love. Forced reverence is not respect. Religion must be freed, and therefore free, and must therefore be allowed to be criticised. Claims of truth will withstand attacks, but we as human beings must seek truth out, not dictate it to one another. And so in the immortal words of Mr. Oscar Wilde, I may not agree with you, but I will defend to the death your right to make an ass of yourself. We have heard this evening that without courageous figures define what society had deemed unacceptable at the time, human civilization would be in a much worse state.
On that point, you keep referring back to historic figures where the church certainly was a much more powerful and stricter organisation. Do you not feel that we're talking about blasphemy in the modern sense, where churches are definitely much more liberal and only object to the most inflammatory statements?
I'll speak on this a little more later, but the point is that blasphemy is an arbitrary statement, and so while we may not look back and say, well, what Galileo said was blasphemous, he was deemed a heretic. So was Isaac Newton, so was Darwin. All men of theistic faith at the times they were branded as such anyway. But
on that point, sir.
No, back and forth.
Yeah,
Sorry.
But I'll come to it. So the likes of Darwin, Galileo, Newton, we would have been proud of them all had we succeeded, or had they succeeded, in deeming them heretics for the crime of blasphemy, including, from the passage I just read out, the Sanhedrin who condemned Jesus to death. We have heard that we must be careful of insulting people or causing anger, and indeed we should. There is a moral as well as a democratic imperative that we show due respect to those we disagree with or those that we don't understand. But when we restrict free speech, then we not only suppress the individual who speaks, but more importantly, we deprive people of being able to hear that opinion. Now, it is amazing the plenty of literary giants one has at their disposal when defending free speech. But to quote one, George Orwell, if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. All these commentators on society recognise the necessity of free speech as that fundamental right which underpins others in a pluralistic society. So, what does it look like when people are not allowed to blaspheme? We need not look too far for manifestations, extreme manifestations of blasphemy laws on this earth. The power to decide what constitutes blasphemy is a power which has been shown time and again in human history to be too susceptible to corruption. In Saudi Arabia, it has been shown that punishments for blasphemy...
On that point?
Punishments for blasphemy involve prison, fines, lashing by whip, can range up to death. Torture is often utilised to extract confessions. Blasphemy charges are made exclusively against those who criticise Salafism or the Saudi monarchy, or indeed anybody who does not practice non-Salafi Islam.
We have made it very clear that we do not agree with criminalising blasphemy, and you keep using the idea of blasphemy as being illegal as to show that you should be allowed to blaspheme. I feel that's really detracting from what we're saying, that you shouldn't, you can, but you shouldn't.
Sure. I take the point on that, and to be clear, that was the first time I spoke about it being illegal. What we're saying is that if we start off by saying, oh no, don't say that, if we start off with societal pressure and there's a gradual building, it ultimately does manifest itself in illegality once that becomes a large enough force. I understand that's not what you're suggesting initially, but we're suggesting that that can be the ultimate outcome and that the consequences can be dire. So, I stand before you today, a devout Christian, but determined to preserve the right of someone to blaspheme because it is a particularly and ominously ambiguous concept. So, what is blasphemy has been mentioned several times tonight. You use the phrases of my friends here take a semantic point of view. What is one's motives? This is the point. One man's blasphemy is another man's truth. The fact that we have argued this point is in itself evidence that there can be no benevolent arbiter on this earth who decides what could and should not be said. So as was said in Proverbs, the vexation of a fool is known at once, but the prudent ignores an insult. Sometimes one blasphemes in pursuit of truth. To sacrifice our ability to blaspheme is to sacrifice free speech. For while blasphemy may change with the times, truth does not. Just look to the example of Christ, who was condemned of blasphemy when he proclaimed truth. And so, I was just finished by asking, imploring you, for your sake, blaspheme if you must. For rhetoric's sake, blaspheme if you must. For the enlightened, egalitarian and democratic principles which underpin our society, blaspheme if you must. Ladies and gentlemen, for God's sake, blaspheme if you must. Dearest captive audience, this house would blaspheme. Amen.
Mr. Lockhart, thank you for that. As an honorary chair or acting chair, I've fallen down in my duties already because I forgot to mention that this gentleman is a maiden speaker, so let's thank him. I'm not making a mistake twice. Another maiden speaker, Mr. Daniel Lowe.
Thank you, Honourable Chairman, Mr President, Honourable Members. Let me first just begin by addressing briefly some of the things which we've heard from our friends on the proposition tonight. We've heard about Christianity being enforced upon society. I'm not sure where that came from. We've heard some mixing up with blasphemy and heresy, the two separate things. We'll maybe come on to those a little bit later. Mr President, this motion is predicated on the reality of God's existence. You might have noticed. To blaspheme is to speak in a way which shows irreverence for God. It follows then, if there is no God, there is no blasphemy. There can be no such thing. The second point is that this predication is a fitting one. The presupposition that God exists is entirely in keeping with science and philosophy. Now, the first speaker mentioned there's an argument from causality. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. As everything which has a beginning has a cause, there's also an argument for morality. If objective moral values do not exist, God does not exist. But there are some things which are objectively wrong.
On that one.
Yes, I think.
If there is no God, there is no blasphemy. Blasphemy is the application of ideology, it's an interpretation of an idea. Ideas exist where people do, and people who certainly do exist unless they've been misformed. So, as far as I'm aware, there is going to be blasphemy so long as there are ideas, and so long as people reject those ideas, there will be blasphemy, and that is wrong.
Well, if blasphemy is to speak in a way which shows irreverence for God, it follows that if there is no such God, then the whole concept of blasphemy goes entirely out the window. It becomes just completely irrelevant. But as I was saying, if there are objective moral values, then there is a God. And there are some things, of course, which are objectively wrong. Rape, sexual harassment, child abuse, we could go on. In a world without a God, any conceived deeper meaning would be purely an illusion. But let me come to a particular blasphemy pertinent in our context. Of all the figures in human history, Jesus Christ, I believe, is the only one whose name is commonly used as a curse word to express disgust
I'm open to people pointing out others, but as far as I can see, he is the single solitary figure subjected to such abuse. Why this man? The question is begged. Well, the proposition have told us that people have rights but not ideas. Well, Jesus Christ was a person. He was a historical person. There seems to be only one logical reason why this sole solitary figure should be the object of such unparalleled scorn and derision. And that is, to me, I'm going to say, the biblical explanation. That the reality of God is seen by all, but that we are little rebels. We're haters of God, spiteful, proud and boastful. In our hearts we naturally hate the very one who's given us life. The very one whose Son then has stepped into the world that he had made to save us from ourselves. And that would make sense. Yes?
Do you not think to those who want to discard Christians that to say that we hate God is rather patronising?
Well, patronising or not, I'm sure you're a man who can take a harsh truth if it is the truth. So it's a question of whether or not it's the truth. But it would make sense of the anomaly as to why this man's name, Jesus Christ, along with the name of God himself, are the sole names subjected to such vitriolic abuse. So, hearing this, if Christianity is true, we should not blaspheme. We should not blaspheme God's name or that of his Son, Jesus Christ. Yes?
Yes, indeed. So, you make a point about how Jesus Christ is used in an irreverent way. I can tell you now, as a point of information, that comes from you should not take your Lord's name in vain. And that negative connotation, of course, has transformed as language goes over time. So it's not necessarily an irreverence of Christ itself, merely a response to the negativity through doctrine of the church, saying that you should not take it in vain's name.
Well, we could look at the origin of that, and that was an instruction which was divine origin. But on the point that you raised earlier, there are no instances of necessity when it is a necessary thing to blaspheme. I would say there are no instances when it is necessary to use the name of God or of Jesus Christ, a person, as a curse word to express disgust. And we certainly didn't get any concrete examples from the proposition this evening. Common decency would require that a person's name should not be trampled through the mud in this way. I think that's common decency. But to make some progress, if Christianity is true, we shouldn't blaspheme God's name or Jesus' name because we're indebted to him for our very lives. Because Jesus gave up everything to reconcile us to God, and he himself will one day be our judge. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the fundamental reason why we shouldn't blaspheme. The reality of God. This is why blasphemy exists. It's why it's in a category all by itself. It's not just distasteful language. And we've heard that it's all about control. But Christians, for one, don't choose not to blaspheme out of slavish legalism and talking about love for the God who has given his very best for us. I'm not going to, because I need to make some progress, sorry about that. Now I understand that for the vast majority of you in this room probably don't believe any of that at all. But nevertheless, we've seen some good arguments for why it is rational to believe in a God. And so far we haven't seen comparably good arguments from the proposition for why we should not believe in God.
Point of clarification.
Yes.
So, is the timer running? Because I want to be slightly verbose here, because I want to explain this. I'm not going to be very verbose.
Well done. There are no more questions now. I'll take this into account, so go ahead.
Right, so, does your entire argument then rest on Christianity is true? If Christianity is true, blaspheming is wrong, therefore blaspheming is wrong.
It seems obvious to me that if there is a God, that we should not blaspheme, because he will be our judge. That is a very, very obvious point. Okay, the whole proposition is based on the assumption that there isn't a God, because if we are taking his name in vain, then we would be subject to his wrath. And so that is their assumption. So I'm saying if there is good evidence to believe in God, there's good reason not to blaspheme. But in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, whether or not God exists, and this comes on to your point, we gain nothing from blasphemy. For the sake of societal cohesion, as we've heard, for the sake of common decency and respect, there is no reason why we should treat anyone's name with such derision and scorn as can be shown. on the contrary, we gain much from choosing to refrain from blasphemy. And I would remind you that this motion predicates itself on the assumption that God exists, because if there is no God, there can be no blasphemy, and therefore it is logical not to blaspheme. And I urge the House to reject the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. And again, another round of applause for me. And now for the proposition, Mr Liam Mackle.
So just to begin by rebuking something that the opposition just said, and that's something about the debate in general. Seems we fall into a trap of myopia. We focused on the present, and we focused on Christianity. But what of Islam? What of Hinduism? There are other religions and other faiths that must live together. In reference to what the same member has just mentioned, that if we are to blaspheme, we must assume that God exists. That's not true. If one is to live with a Christian who believes in God, one must be aware that they believe that blasphemy is important. So even if you're non-religious, you still have to take into account that whilst living in a democracy with other people, we have to take account of their feelings towards their faith. We've been asked by the opposition to examine our motives, and this is what we have done. We on the proposition don't want to simply blaspheme for blaspheming's sake. We with a heavy heart have thought that blaspheming is sometimes a necessary evil. As we've seen, there are many ways that blasphemy can be construed, and we've seen that's part of the issue. But I want to say what blasphemers we are. We are reluctant blasphemers. We are those who do what is right and what is truthful, as my esteemed colleague Scott has alluded to. We step one foot into the unknown, like Galileo and Jesus Christ himself, and in doing so, attempt to make humanity better. And you only bring to the attention of the House and step outside Christianity the actions of men who took the step, who took actions which at the time were undoubtedly blasphemous, but nonetheless entirely necessary and right. Take Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, an Indian social and economic reformer, the first minister of law in the Indian Republic, who in the Annihilation Past set out his arguments for an end to the caste system, a system wholly entrenched in the religious dogma of Hinduism, such that speaking out against it could result in your excommunication. And thank you. And indeed, Dr. Ambedkar himself converted to Buddhism. His blasphemy was the fundamental caste system. In his work, he enlightens us to the plight of the untouchables, those in the lowest caste, with a harrowing story. While the assembly of the untouchables was engaged in the partaking of the food, the Hindus in their hundreds, with armed with lathis, rushed to the scene to spoil the food and belabor the untouchables, who left the food they had been served and ran away for their lives. And why was this murderous assault committed on defenceless untouchables? The reason given is that the untouchables were impudent enough to serve butter. Dr. Ambedkar wished to move the social structure of India once more towards liberty, fraternity and equality, away from the religious dogma of untouchables and caste. And this is just one example. Think of Galileo, locked away for life, speak for speaking the truth, that we in fact do orbit the sun. Think of Jesus, nailed to the cross and left to suffer and die. As I've said, we must not become myopic in this issue. We are lucky enough now to live in a time where liberty, fraternity and equality are prevalent in our culture. But respect and reverence come in many forms, and sometimes blasphemy is one of those forms.
On that point,
yes,
it's the arguments that you've made. The arguments that you've made thus far have been about crimes committed by people for religious acts and those that come from abuses of state power where religion is given power. The question I pose to you is, do you think that the separation of church and state necessitates blasphemy? And if it doesn't, then can we do so in a way that we don't need to blaspheme to separate church and state and therefore protect freedoms, as is the goal of all the examples you've just given?
The motion times this House would blaspheme. So we only need to present circumstances in which blaspheming in pursuit of the truth is a necessary action. In order to, we are reluctant to be blaspheming. It doesn't necessarily mean that the circumstance will ever present itself in our lives. We just have to say that there is circumstances in which we would blaspheme. As I say, we're lucky enough to live in a world where respect, liberty, fraternity, and equality have been bestowed upon us. But we must not forget that that was won by the blasphemous actions of men before. For the Galileos, the Jesus Christs, and the inventors, life today was made possible. If not for the actions of those men, we would not be having this conversation so freely. And while we may live in this free society now, there is not there's not a possibility that one day, as we've seen with Trump and Brexit, that the society we now enjoy much of may recede to more contemptuous and less equality and liberty and fraternity. And if that were to be the case, and say religious institutions were to get more power again, we must be able to accept the fact that there might come a day when blasphemy and speaking out against the power of those institutions will be once again necessary to restore liberty, fraternity, and equality. And so with that, I would say, with a heavy heart, this House would blaspheme.
Thank you, sir, for closing up the proposition. And now finishing for the opposition, Mr. Morgan Hickman.
Honourable members of the House, if I may just start with a slight bit of rebuttal this evening. The proposition wishes to present an argument for necessity. However, we can't truly identify what the necessary argument is. The government argue that it is necessary to further Western liberalism, and quite possibly in several speeches, humanism. This is an ideological and institutional perspective that discloses the proposition's bias. Members of the House, we cannot simply hold that the Western liberal ideals are objectively correct, and they require just the same criticism as they are proposing for other institutions, religious institutions. The Deputy Prime Minister stated that blasphemy, and it was repeated further down the bench as well, that the blasphemy is used to silence legitimate opinions. And this fails on the same principle, that it's legitimate opinions, not just yet, legitimate opinions on the basis of Western liberalism. Furthermore, the Deputy Prime Minister has stated that potentially everything is blasphemy. I don't think that fits. We've heard the etymological foundation of the phrase blasphemy of injurious speech. Quite simply, everything cannot be injurious speech.
On that point.
No, thank you. And we've also heard a couple of points that from the whip that when discussing and living with Christians, it is necessary to consider and contend your expression. This is falling into a vast ballpark of the opposition's argument. And finally, on a point of rebuttal, I would just identify that the government accused this bench of ignoring other religions. The Leader of the Opposition, Deputy Leader of the Opposition's arguments apply equally to all theistic faiths. They apply without bias towards Christianity. in the Western world. I'd just like to move on to address some points of clash. So firstly, and as has been reiterated several times on the opposition bench, the government confuses the necessity to reject oppressive institutions with injurious speech towards deity. These are two very, very different, at the end of this, two very, very different concepts that I think have been blurred quite severely by the proposition. Yes, I'll take it now.
So my question is, are you conflating like liberalism and like tolerance and acceptance with just Western society? Because there are many examples throughout history of tolerant societies that were non-European.
Okay, I've got a good point. Yes, absolutely. I understand where you're coming from, that we speak in this house often of Western liberalism. And we do in fact consider, because while we have seen liberal ideas and ideologies throughout history, Western liberalism in itself is a unique version of that. And as such, that's why it's relevant to considering that in this evening's debate. I would also challenge, one of the points of clash we've had is also that illegality is the inevitable consequence of the House or general people's opposition to the exercise of freedom of expression in the form of blasphemy. I don't think there's a logical premise for that, and you've heard that from our side of the House previously. I think one of the key points that the House has heard discussion on this evening is expression versus respect, and this. Please.
Would my own friend agree with me that our own choice of attire this evening is evidence enough that we believe in freedom of expression?
Absolutely, yes. The Honourable Gentleman makes a very, very good point. And exactly so, the proposition, the opposition and proposition agree that freedom of expression is an important principle. But we don't believe that respect can be transcended by a subjective principle.
On that point,
okay.
Could you speak explicitly, for instance, to an example given of Jesus? You say it's respect versus something else. The point we're trying to make is that often blasphemy is necessary in our pursuit of truth, because while the rest of society might deem it blasphemous, we do not. So it's not a case of disrespect, it's a case of truth.
Are you the sole arbiter of truth?
No, exactly.
But I think that can apply. I mean, I would actually refer you. Generally, we are a fairly empirical society, and I would refer the government to the admission that science in itself requires protection in order to actually have development. And on that principle, as a society, we tend to accept that as a key principle.
On that point,
I'm running out of time. We've also heard the argument of the predication of God's non-existence for the proposition's argument to succeed. And also we've heard alluded to, on this side of the House, the common argument of Pascal's wager, that we have an awful lot more to lose if we're wrong on this side of the House than if we're on this side of the House. And equally, we've heard as well that blasphemy was necessary for the world to progress to how it is today. Quite frankly, that's a very hypothetical and spurious statement, but we cannot believe that blasphemy, in the terms specified, can be held in this light. The final point I would like to make is that I think we've had an unnecessary redefinition of the motion by the proposition throughout this debate. That this House would blaspheme is what that's what before the House today. It's not a question of this House would sometimes blaspheme if it's necessary, maybe. For this very reason, ladies and gentlemen, I very happily oppose this motion.
Mr. President to open the debate to the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Guest Chair. Hickman, bonus points for mentioning Pascal Voyager. There are other little concept, but I do love it. It can be used to justify so many things. So we can read me off the need of that. So yes, we will take no more than 10 minutes of questions, which I'm thinking is going to be 2 rounds. I'm also hoping that for the next few weeks it's going to be 3v3s, so there will be more time for questions. So first question for this side, the proposition, I will give it to Ms. Douglas.
Thank you. So my question is, what does the proposition think for sometimes, for example, when blasphemy becomes prejudice, or when blasphemy is almost like used to justify prejudice, even sometimes the genocide. So like for example, Hitler used anti-Semitism, which in some perspectives could be considered a blasphemy of Judaism, to unfortunately, kill 6 million Jewish people in the US. Well, when it was the British colonies, the British blasphemized Native American religions to justify that they were savages, to kill them. So, what do you think about that?
I think it's not that. Who's first? There.
Yes, okay. Well, that would fall outside if I would define it as not blaspheming needlessly, but blaspheming with necessity. Those were completely unnecessary, undoubtedly cruel, and inhumane. And the proposition would never stand by such an interpretation. Also, you! This proposition did not swirl the motion. The motion says this House would blaspheme, not this House will blaspheme, not this House should blaspheme. The predication of the motion being that this House would blaspheme dictates conditions. We are absolutely within our right to propose the motion as such. It is completely reasonable. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Neill. Anybody from the opposition can respond? You don't have to, but the option's there. Ms Gallen, respond.
When you say that you would blaspheme, quite often you have said that it's to further scientific progress, and that if we had no blaspheming, that the world would not have moved on. Well, that's quite simply a hypothesis, and it ensures that you are saying that everything we know at the minute is true. I'm going to quote Terry Pratchett. He said that 200 years ago we knew that the world was flat. Today we know that it is a globe. If their single definition, if their claim that blasphemy is stopping all scientific progress, it's quite simply not true, because in today's society we say that you can blaspheme, and yet no one has come up with any extraordinary scientific new development that can challenge Galileo or Isaac Newton or anything like that.
Point of order. Don't you better not be abusing this rule, Mr. Mackle. What is your point of order?
The question.
Be that as it may, I have nothing to say. Any questions for the opposition? Oh, I shall give it to Miss O'Neill. Harry Neill. I remember.
There's been this emphasis that this House wouldn't blaspheme because we should respect religion and the views of the religious. But I would like to point out that does religion not disrespect mass of people? So why, in a case of religion being highly disrespectful of the gay community, of women's rights, and I'm not just talking about Christianity. I hope it's not taken that way, because that seems to be where this has went. Why then should we not blaspheme, or why then should we censor ourselves until religion is to respect the masses who it has to demand its respect from?
Thank you, Ms. Ira Johnson. Who for the opposition would care to respond? This is Gallen.
Religion does not disrespect a great deal of people. It says nowhere in the Bible that gay marriage is illegal. That is interpretation, and perhaps it's been interpreted wrongly, but it does not say that it is disrespectful. It does not say, well, you can say that the Old Testament says some pretty ridiculous things. It does. It says that we can't wear clothes that are two different fabrics. But we're looking at the New Testament. We base our religion. It talks about respecting your neighbour, showing love to your neighbour, and I'd say that that shows great respect to everyone. And to say that, sorry, what's this here? And yes, two wrongs don't make a right. If I am offending you in some way by believing in religion, you offending me is not going to make anything any better.
Thank you, Ms Gallen. For the proposition, Mr. Ryan, respond.
So you mentioned that it is in fact an interpretation, and I absolutely agree with you. It is an interpretation of the Bible that's put forward by institutions with their own doctrine. And their own doctrine, of course, which is the physical application of, say, blasphemy. Because it is an interpretation, it is something, of course, that is open to whoever decides it is. It is not objective, it is unbinding, it is purely subjective, and thus is purely opinion. So, yes, I think it encapsulates quite perfectly how blasphemy is a useless metric. It is not in any way a yardstick for what is moral, what is acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Neill. Are there any abstaining points of the motion? Mr. Bradley.
Mr. Chair, members of the House, I'm quite surprised this hasn't been brought up, considering I made the event page photo, but what do either side think of Stephen Fry's comments, I believe the year before last, and the fact that he was technically guilty of blasphemy laws in the Republic of Ireland? If you want more clarification on what that was, I've got the entire transcript here.
Sadly, I don't think we have time for that, but I'm glad the option is available. I'll ask that the proposition respond first. Who would like to do so? Yes, sir.
Mr. Fry's comments, whether you may agree with them or not, were put out there as his opinion, as his contribution to a debate or his thoughts on a deity. The absolute wrong response would be to say that he should not be able to say that. Indeed, he was he wasn't gratuitous in how he put it, and while some people may have been offended or even thought what he said was silly, the point is that you disagree with him, but you don't shut him down and say that you can't say that. So I would like to see it. We've been arguing a lot in abstract principles this evening. It'd be really great if we could apply this, and I'd really like to hear some actual responses to the Galileo or the Jesus example. I don't know what that means. So it would be, if the opposition had a chance to speak at any point, it would be great to hear them directly respond, as we have requested, to Galileo being branded a blasphemer, to Jesus being put to death for being a blasphemer.
Thank you, Mr. Lockhart. A general rule of thumb for anybody considering speaking in the future: teammates can never, ever, under any circumstance, read each other's writing. It's just physically impossible, it seems. So, who from the opposition would care to respond? Yes, go ahead, Ms Burnett.
Well, with reference to the Stephen Fry case, we repeatedly made the case that we do not want blasphemy to be illegal as it is in itself. It is also worth noting in the Stephen Fry case, the man who reported it to the police gave an interview to the Guardian, and he told the Guardian, I wasn't actually offended, I was just interested to see if this law actually works. So I'm not sure if it's entirely relevant to our debate.
Thank you, Ms Burnett. And one final question for the proposition. Whoever looks the most enthusiastic will get it. Excellent. Will it be Mr. Dobbin?
Thank you, Mr. President. It's been prevalent from the majority of the opposition's case tonight that they are not in any way opposed to even the total separation of church and state. And so my question to the proposition is, if that the protection of human rights, civil rights, social, political or otherwise, are capable, that we can do that without having to blaspheme, and that if we separate church and state entirely, that then religion has no influence on those human rights in the same way as they used to, then what is gained in blaspheming in that situation? If we see that without blaspheming, then it's possible to protect these rights.
Thank you, Mr. Dobbin. Who from the proposition would care to respond? Mr. Neill.
Well, I actually agree with you. If there is an avenue on which we can avoid blasphemy to make a point, then blasphemy would be completely pointless. And the argument we put is blasphemy as a necessity. If there is no other avenue, It's worth noting that you can't really change the structure of power by conforming to power. And in particular, if you're looking at, say, a trend or a super trend, sometimes you just can't go around the bush. You have to take it directly. You have to challenge it up front. And of course, we've heard different levels of blasphemy that are actually mentioned. And I think this is an opportunity to mention very quickly. We were talking about the opposition saying using the Lord's name as veil as blasphemy, for instance. That is not at all necessary. It is not at all relevant to our argument in any capacity. I think that's cool.
Thank you, Mr. Neill. Anybody from the opposition care to respond? Mr. Lowe.
I'd just like to direct the House back to the essence of blasphemy, which is injurious speech, spurious speech directed towards a deity. And just to clarify that criticism of a power structure, of a religion, or of any institution cannot really constitute blasphemy. It's a different issue.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Sorry, Mr. Neill. Telling. Are there any final questions for the opposition once again? Whoever looks the most enthusiastic is going to get it. It's got to be Ms Fleming.
Right, so I think one of the first two speakers on the opposition said criticise the church, the institution, not the God. But if your God believes that someone is lesser because of their sexuality, I believe your God is wrong, and I will say that. If your God is saying that women are lesser, I believe your God is wrong, and I will say that. And if that is blasphemy, I will say that because I believe that your God is wrong. Not your church is wrong, your God is wrong. So, what do you say to that?
Thank you, Ms. Fleming. Who from the opposition would care to respond?
I previously said God did not say that gay people are lesser. God did not say that women are lesser. It was
Which God?
any God. Well, I do not know what every religion in the world says. As Mr. Moore says, there are an awful lot of them. I would admire anyone who would know what every God in the world says, but as we have argued from quite a Christian perspective, I wouldn't ask that because it's the religion I know best. The Christian God did not say that gay people are lesser, it did not say that women were lesser. It were people in the church, priests, I think it was St. Paul who said that women should not speak in the assembly. St. Paul is not God. To say that St. Paul is God is blasphemy, and he's a member of the institution, not God himself.
Thank you, Ms. Gallen. I'd like to point out that I'm a practitioner of the Church of Cthulhu, long may he terrorise. He thinks that they're all vastly inferior to everything. So, are there anyone from the proposition who would care to respond? Mr. Mackle.
So yeah, the first question can be shown is that, and unlike what the opposition are trying to say, that blasphemy is a direct assault against God, whatever God that may be. Blasphemy is in fact a social construct used by institutions who interpret the Word of God in whatever way they see fit. That's what we're saying is that the proposition say that in order to reform those institutions to get closer to the Word of God, we must blaspheme.
Thank you, Mr. Mackle. And one final abstaining point, I think you get a brief one. Who looks the most enthusiastic today? Mr. O'Neill, you put your hand at 3 hands, you just haven't been trying, and very footed, so it has to go to Mr. Dr.
I'll throw it.
Oh, there you go. Mr. O'Neill, what is your question?
What does the House think of the fact in terms of the figures that there's a complete correlation between tolerance and freedom of speech within the whole of the world? Where blasphemy laws have been used, it's actually the least tolerant societies. What do you think on that? Because both talk about tolerance, and what do you think that fits in between freedom of speech and most tolerant and the opposite?
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. I'll ask the opposition to respond first this time. Mr. Hickman to respond.
The opposition's case has been that blasphemy laws are not the correct way to go about it. We are talking about a policy discussion about whether or not we as a group of individuals, we as a collective, if you so wish, would not blaspheme. We would choose not to exercise our rights that we believe we have, and we have affirmed throughout this bench, that we have the right to freedom of expression, but we would not exercise them in such a way as to blaspheme. And I would completely agree that in societies that utilise a state power to restrict language absolutely in an authoritarian sense, that is a way to shut down tolerance. That is a way to prevent individuals from expressing and from progressing as a society. However, that's not the discussion we're having, because that is a whole ethos, that is a whole atmosphere that society is founded upon. We are discussing upon the autonomous decision of individuals to not exercise their right in a specific way. We talk, and I will take one example and then I'll sit down. We talked about recently the freedom of people to express their opinions about other people in terms of the spectrum of gender. That is another example where we are willing to restrict in the sense of forcing them to expand. It is a restriction, I would argue, but for the purpose of this debate, it is analogous. But we are willing to enforce specific use of language in certain scenarios, in certain circumstances, at the autonomous decision of the individuals. And that is something we have decided to do as a society, not impose top-down.
Thank you, Mr. Hickman. And finally, who would care to... Mr. Lockhart.
I agree clearly with the statement, so just briefly in response to that, you say that you would not, you say you have the right, I take your point, you're not arguing over the law, you would choose not to exercise that right to insult someone or to blaspheme. What our ultimate thesis here is that you can't make that decision, that you are not the arbiter of what is blasphemous or not, it is the interpreter. So whether you intend to or not, you may say something which you believe to be true, but that doesn't mean that people won't be offended by it or won't deem it as blasphemous. Galileo did not come up with that theory simply because he wanted to blaspheme, he wanted to speak truth. So again, this is not up to the person who says the words, whether other people deem it as blasphemous. Blasphemy is a subjective term, and we must allow people to blaspheme if they so wish, or if they so feel the need to, if we are to speak truth to society.
Thank you, Mr. Lockhart, and thank you to all of our speakers and indeed the members of the House this evening for a very, I believe, well-informed and respectful event. So yes, all that remains now is for the closing remarks from our guest chair and any vote of the House. Just before we move on to that, Mr. O'Neill, woodworkers this evening. So we will be adjourning to woodworkers just down the road. It's fine. It's actually quite nice. It has a very nice atmosphere loud, and it's working out that a good deal of us don't actually drink, and we still return there after we did it. So if you yourself are a non-drinker, it's still a very fun place to go. So yes, without further ado, I would welcome our guest chair to return to give us his closing remarks.
Present, you're very light on your feet, lumber along here very close there. Mr. President, let me thank you again for this opportunity to be here this evening. I've been very impressed, I have to say. It's good to see that the level of skill in debate of this society has not diminished over the year and over the years. And also impressed very much with the way in which we have shown restraint and respect for one another. Doubtless, your eagle eye, no one would dare stray into illegal territory. But it is good to see a generosity of spirit. But it's impressive to see the range of opinions here, ranging from impassioned pleas for liberty and necessity through to the need for ordinary basic common decency and respect. And this is an ongoing tension that we have within our society. I wouldn't dare to try to influence the vote in any way tonight. I promise complete objectivity. But I am very pleased to see a debate that can range the whole way from Pascal's wager through to Father Ted. I'm especially pleased with Father Ted, thank because Father Jack is my inspiration. I base my entire work in ministry around it. I think that's enough. The night is far spent. But, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Guest Chair. It was a great honour to have you here this evening. Wonderful occasion to speak. Thank you very much on behalf of us. So, here we are at the end, the vote. Please have your membership cards at the ready. We are counting this time. If you try to put your hand in the air without a card in hand, I can see the difference between skin colour and purple.
I don't have a card. I would really like to vote.
I know you're a member. I know you're a member.
Me too. I don't have my card.
If I know you're a member, which, I mean, try your luck with that if you want, but only if I know you're a member will I count your hand with a card in it. Otherwise, yes, speakers are also allowed to vote for themselves. What's
the point in taking a total vote at the start of voting?
That was prior opinion. This is now speaker ability after the debate. But they haven't heard you speak yet. Could all those, remember, speaker ability. Could all those who believe that the proposition spoke better this evening, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Keep them up, keep those like time.
Something mad.
16? 15, yes, let's go with 15. Could all those who believe that the opposition spoke better this evening, please raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
Keep them up, keep them up, keep them up.
4.
4? 5. Let's go 5. And could all those who believe both sides spoke equally well, equally terribly, or wish to express no opinion on the matter whatsoever, please raise your hand and say it loud, say it proud, say meh!
Meh!
Hey, keep on, keep on, keep on.
Vote early, vote often.
10, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Guest Chair, could you please read back the vote to me?
Well, Mr. President, for the proposition, we have 15. For the opposition, we have 5. And the nays, well, we should abstainers of 10.
There we have it.